On Whit Tuesday, I went to Feltham to see the Aston Martin team set off for a new adventure for them, the 1,000 kilometers of the daunting Nurburgring in Germany. 2 Astons were entered. The first, race number 9, was the DB3S chassis number 5 for Peter Collins and the new find Tony Brooks. This was the car which had first appeared at the Empire Trophy in Alton Park during April 1955. More recently, Roy Salvadori had won in it at Silverstone on the day he crashed his Maserati in the Formula One race, ending up in hospital with concussion and a damaged leg. Recovering from those injuries, Roy was down to drive the second Aston. He was to share DB3S chassis number 8 with Peter Walker, and its race number was 10. This car was one in which Moss had placed second to Salvadori a fortnight earlier at Silverstone. So, with that result behind them, and handling for which the Aston was renowned at a premium on those serpentine 14 miles of the Nurburgring, prospects looked good. So off went Aston's AEC transporter on its trip across the Channel, Belgium, and so on to the Nurburgring. Nestling in the Eifel Mountains, it had been built in 1923 as a massive job creation scheme during the Weimar Republic's recession period. The Hotel Lockmüller was another of those establishments chosen by team manager John Wire as capable of supplying the quality of food and service that he required for his team. Wire gathered his boys together for a pre-practice briefing. Meanwhile, in the paddock, work was in progress giving the cars their final preparation. The works Jaguar D-Type number 7 was to be driven by Mike Hawthorne and Desmond Titterington. Dunlop not only supplied Jaguar with tyres, but with their archetypal pierced disc centre-locking wheels as well. The sister D-Type, with race number 8, was to be driven by Paul Frere, who'd crashed in practice. Jaguar had been to the Nürburgring before in 1955, when a Curia Cos had tested the water, but both their cars lost their brakes in practice. The talented Scot, Jimmy Stewart, found himself pinned underneath his overturned Jaguar, with fuel pouring over him. He gave up motor racing on the spot, and a brilliant career came to an end. A sole MGA had been entered for Fitzwilliam and Carnegie. Fitting an extra spare wheel in the boot clearly posed a problem. Now Moss had joined the Maserati team and armed with the superb handling Tipo 300S. Great things were expected of these cars from Bologna. Porsche on home ground were also expectant, on the twisty Nürburgring where good handling and brakes would be far more important than sheer power. John Wire looked apprehensive as Aston took their first exploratory laps, and Peter Walker came back to report on conditions. Their car's best was some 8 seconds slower than Tony Brooks in the sister car, and over half a minute slower than Fangio's time in a 4-cylinder 3.5-litre Ferrari. Peter Collins was next to return, and Peter, who knew the Nurburgring well, was unhappy, being shown up by new boy Tony Brooks. Brooks, new to Aston and new to the Nurburgring, was posting better times. "It's so bumpy," he said, "the back end just leaps about and it's impossible to get the best from the handling." John checked the times with the team's timekeepers. Why were they so uncompetitive? The next report came in from Salvadori. The same story. They were 11 seconds slower than the fastest Porsche, which had half the engine capacity. The DB3S is now in its 4th season of racing, and the sooner its replacement comes along, the better. That was the general feeling in the Aston camp. It rained, as it often does in the Eifel Mountains, for some of the practice period. Ferrari had a range of cars, with two of the new 290 Mille Miglia models with de Dion rear suspension and a new V12 with 3.5-litre engine. So, with practice over, it was time to put the cars back into the transporters, ready for the morrow. Race day dawned fine and sunny. Trade stands were laid out and the spectators gathered all around the 14-mile circuit, 70,000 people in all. 57 cars got away at the 9 a.m. start. Too early for me, but the race was likely to run for nearly 8 hours. Frere was driving a Jaguar D-Type XKD 504, which had been hastily driven out on the road from Coventry by Norman Dewis to replace XKD 603, which Paul had crashed in practice. But on lap 7, Frere retired the replacement with transmission troubles. Moss now had a 20-second lead over Fangio, with Hawthorn still lying third. Then De Portigo was disqualified for having received outside assistance. 12 policemen had carried the Ferrari out of that hedge. By lap 14, Moss in his Maserati had a whole 1 minute's lead over Fangio. The British MGA was out, and Tony Brooks had taken over from Collins, whose race pace had been as disappointing as his practice time. On lap 15, Moss came in and handed over with a 2.5-minute lead to Jean Berra. And a lap later, Harry Schell had replaced Taruffi in the second, number 6 Maserati. Then the Maserati team hit real trouble. Berra brought the lead car in. The bumpy circuit had broken yet another car's rear suspension. And so Castellotti now led in the Ferrari he was sharing with Fangio. De Portago was second, having taken over the number 4 Ferrari from Phil Hill. And poor Ken Wharton never got to turn a wheel. Hawthorn and Titterington were third in the D-Type. Maserati now also got into the car swapping act, perfectly legal by the race regulations today. So Moss's partner Berra was put into the Maserati number 6, leaving Schell and Taruffi on the sidelines, after they'd got their own car up to 3rd place. Perdiza in the Maserati number 12 pitted with rear suspension troubles. He did eventually rejoin, but only to retire for good next time around. So at half distance, 22 laps, the order was Fangio and then Jean de Bien, both in Ferraris. In third came Behrer and Moss in the replacement Maserati, ahead of the Hawthorne-Titterington D-Type, and amazingly, in fifth place overall, a 1500cc Porsche Spider in the hands of Taffy von Trips and Umberto Maglione. Behrer had been closing in on the leaders all the time, and on lap 32, Moss took the Maserati over just 1 minute in arrears. 7 laps later, Hawthorne, whose D-Type had been punted in the rear by an errant Porsche, found its fuel tank was pouring petrol. The leak was plugged, and Titterington returned to the race. With 6 laps to go to the finish, Fangio brought the lead Ferrari in for its final pit stop. Whilst he was stationary, Moss flashed past into the lead. By the time Fangio was in motion again, Moss had a 25-second lead. He continued to stretch it right through to the checkered flag. The last lap saw the demise of 2 of the 3 remaining British cars, with Titterington's D-Type and Salvadori's Aston failing to make the distance at the final hump. So Moss's Maserati achieved a famous victory ahead of 2 Ferraris. The Von Trips Porsche finished an excellent 4th overall, ahead of the final British survivor, Collins and Brooks, in the Aston.
Jedes Quartett also hinauf in die Aston-Kurve, dann wieder die lange Abfahrt zu nehmen. Hinauf in die Aston-Kurve, dann wieder die lange Abfahrt zu nehmen.